Hello everyone, P41 here. So this is Tetanus. It's a Carter Talon 150 GY6 Buggy. I believe it's about 2008 if I'm not mistaken. It's got a 150cc GY6 engine. And what we're going to talk about today is how to easily convert this from the factory AC CDI to a DC CDI. So the wiring on this buggy is kind of a mess, but I'm going to try to explain everything as clearly as I can. Now this buggy is actually set up so that I can switch between AC or DC CDIs. That just gives me a whole lot of flexibility depending on what's on hand. Now from the factory they would have run one of these AC CDIs. You can compare that with the DC CDI that's currently installed. The DC CDI is a lot bigger. Now the pinout is pretty much the same between the AC and the DC CDIs. So here you have your ignition pulse. This is to the positive side of your ignition coil. This is your kill wire. This is going to be your power wire. That's going to be either AC from the stator if you've got an AC CDI, or 12 volts DC if it's a DC CDI. And then these two pins down here are both grounds. So the only thing we need to really change to get this working is we need to change the power coming down this wire from AC current from the stator to 12 volt DC positive. Now if you'll notice, the only thing I've changed at this connector is I've added ground wires going to both grounds. Most vehicles will only have one ground wire going to either of the pins. I just did this for redundancy. That way any CDI that I put in there, regardless of which pin it uses for ground, both of them will get a ground. Now normally what you'd want to do is wire this wire right here into a 12 volt switched power source to give the CDI 12 volt switched power. That doesn't work on this buggy though, because there isn't any 12 volt switched power back here. On this buggy what they do is they switch the ground to the coil through the ignition switch. That's how they kill the power to the ignition switch, whether it's AC or DC. So what we're going to do instead is we'll just wire this wire into 12 volt constant. So this wire, it looks black and white. It's supposed to be black and red. It's sun faded. So this wire goes into this harness right here, which is your chassis harness, and it comes out like 3 inches down the line right here at this wire, which again supposed to be black and red, but it's faded. Now this would normally be plugged in to this wire, again supposed to be black and red, and this wire goes into the engine harness, and this is our AC power supply from the stator. So what we do is we simply unplug that and we connect it to a 12 volt power source. Now you see here I've just added another connector, and it's on the fused side of this fuse, which is not factory, and that's how I get my 12 volt power. Now the nice thing about doing it this way is that if I want to switch back to an AC CDI, all I have to do is unplug this little bullet connector and plug it back in to the factory power supply from the stator, and then I can switch to an AC CDI very simply, and that's how I can switch between the two. Now there is one downside to running the DC CDI in this manner, and that is that it puts a slight parasitic drain on the battery even when everything's switched off. It's not much, only about 10 milliamps or so, but it is something, and it's something to keep in mind. And for anybody who wants to see how it runs, hopefully this helped you out. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, leave them down below.